Can you answer these GK fast? Which is the largest desert in the world? The Antarctic Desert. What is the capital city of Canada? Ottawa. Which river is the longest in the world? The Nile River, though some say the Amazon. Mount Everest lies on the border of which two countries? Nepal and China, also called Tibet. Which ocean is the largest in the world? The Pacific Ocean. Which country has the most time zones? France, because of its overseas territories. What is the smallest country in the world? Vatican City. Which continent is known as the Dark Continent? Africa. Which country is called the land of the rising sun? Japan. What is the longest mountain range in the world? The Andes. Which strait separates Europe and Asia at Turkey? Bosphorus Strait. Which is the deepest ocean trench in the world? Mariana Trench. What is the largest island in the world? Greenland. Which city is known as the City of Canals? Venice, Italy. Which African country has the largest population? Nigeria. Which river is called the Yellow River? Huanghe River, China. Which continent has no permanent human population? Antarctica. Which desert covers much of Mongolia and northern China? Gobi Desert. Which is the tallest waterfall in the world? Angel Falls, Venezuela. Which country is both in Europe and Asia? Turkey. Which country is the largest by area? Russia. Which country is known as the land of 1,000 lakes? Finland. Which city is located on two continents? Istanbul, Turkey. Which is the largest freshwater lake in the world? Lake Superior. Which river flows through Paris? Seine River. Which country is called the Pearl of the Indian Ocean? Sri Lanka. Which US state has the longest coastline? Alaska. Which mountain range separates Europe and Asia? Ural Mountains. Which is the largest country in Africa? Algeria. Which river is the main water source for Egypt? Nile River. Which country has the highest population in the world? India. Which is the flattest continent? Australia. Which sea separates Saudi Arabia and Africa? Red Sea. Which city is the capital of Australia? Canberra. Which is the world's driest desert? Atacama Desert. Which country is home to the Amazon rainforest? Brazil. Which European city is called the City of Light? Paris. Which country is nicknamed the Land of Fire and Ice? Iceland. Which desert is the coldest in the world? Antarctic Desert. Which river flows through London? Thames River. Which city is known as the Big Apple? New York City. Which is the longest river in South America? The Amazon River. Which European country has the most volcanoes? Italy. Which strait connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Atlantic Ocean? The Strait of Gibraltar. Which is the highest plateau in the world? The Tibetan Plateau. Which is the saltiest body of water on Earth? The Dead Sea. Which is the second largest country in the world by area? Canada. Which desert is the largest hot desert in the world? The Sahara Desert. Which is the highest mountain in North America? Denali, also called Mount McKinley. Which river is the main water source of Baghdad? The Tigris River. Which is the highest mountain in Africa? Mount Kilimanjaro. Which river flows through Baghdad? Tigris River. Which country is known as the land of the midnight sun? Norway. Which lake is the deepest in the world? Lake Baikal. Which river is sacred to Hindus in India? Ganga River. Which ocean surrounds the Maldives? Indian Ocean. Which country is the largest producer of coffee? Brazil. Which is the southernmost continent? Antarctica. Which strait connects the Pacific Ocean to the Arctic Ocean? Bering Strait. Which is the longest river in India? Ganga River. Which is the hottest desert in the world? The Lut Desert in Iran. Which country is known as the land of maple leaf? Canada. Which river flows through Egypt? The Nile River. Which is the coldest inhabited place on earth? Oymyakon, Russia. Which canal connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea? The Suez Canal. Which is the largest volcano in the world? Mauna Loa in Hawaii. Which country has the highest number of islands? Sweden. Which river flows through Rome? The Tiber River. Which country has the longest coastline in the world? Canada. Which mountain range forms the backbone of South America? The Andes Mountains. Which is the largest peninsula in the world? The Arabian Peninsula. Which ocean current warms Western Europe? The Gulf Stream. Which river flows through Washington, D.C.? The Potomac River. Which is the largest bay in the world? The Bay of Bengal. Which is the world's highest capital city? La Paz, Bolivia. Which river forms part of the border between the USA and Mexico? The Rio Grande. Which desert covers most of Botswana and Namibia? The Kalahari Desert. Which country is called the land of the pharaohs? Egypt. Which is the highest peak in Europe? Mount Elbrus in Russia. Which ocean is the warmest? The Indian Ocean. Which river flows through Vienna, Budapest, and Belgrade? The Danube River. Which country has the most pyramids in the world? Sudan. Which is the saltiest sea in the world? The Dead Sea. Which mountain range is the youngest in the world? The Himalayas. Which strait separates India and Sri Lanka? The Palk Strait. Which island country lies southeast of India? Sri Lanka. Which desert is also known as the Great Indian Desert? The Thar Desert. Which is the smallest continent by land area? Australia. Which mountain range runs along the west coast of South America? The Andes Mountains. Which is the largest saltwater lake in the world? The Caspian Sea. Which is the only sea without any coastline? The Sargasso Sea. Which is the largest plateau in the world? The Tibetan Plateau. Which river flows through Baghdad and Basra? The Tigris River. Which is the world's highest navigable lake? Lake Titicaca. Which river flows through Cairo? The Nile River. Which country is called the land of the rising sun? Japan. Which desert is also known as the empty quarter? The Rub al Khali Desert. Which river is the second longest in the world? The Amazon River. Which country has the world's largest population of Muslims? Indonesia. Which country is also called the land of the thunder dragon? Bhutan. Comment your score, and like and subscribe. For more MCQs.